So there's an aspect of my awakening that I feel is quite important to talk about, even though it may be uncomfortable, but that I don't hear other teachers talk about usually, but very much a large part of my journey. So in case that, someone's wondering how I got here, I feel like I need to share about this. And there's quite a bit of parallel, actually, with the first coming of Jesus. So most of my life, really, I was a kind of demon caster. I would say almost all of my life, it was encountering, a bunch of mostly negative spirits. I don't know if I specifically chose this timeline so that I could do that, or if that was sort of semi-coincidental. But either way, it started from my own family, even though it's kind of hard to talk about, as I mentioned in a previous video. But it didn't end there, like I thought, or other people might thought it would. It really continued. Like I mentioned, there are therapists who were also basically demons and pretending to be angels and healers, even though that's still kind of a minority, I would say, but I somehow encountered them. And, also just people in this world. A lot of, I guess you could say, romantic encounters that turned out to be demons. So, when I say demons, what I really mean is just someone with, who may look like a normal person to the world and, even quite high functioning, but when you get to know them closely, they are actually very traumatizing, manipulative, narcissistic, so those things. And really, I think when they encountered me in particular, there was such a contrast that there was even more of an attack sort of orientation towards me. So, I didn't fully understand it at the time, but the more I awakened, the more I understood what was happening. It's really because my light triggered them even more. But also, it was you're shining a light of truth on, basically a very dark or corrupted mind, and that probably makes them uncomfortable and make them want to attack you in various ways. Maybe not literally physical attacks, but I've experienced a lot of psychological kind of attacks where, you can't even really prove that to anyone. There's not really protection for that in our world. So I experienced a string of those, and it's the more I encountered that, the more light I also, became. So this was my journey, and, I'm not saying you have to walk the same way, but I feel like it was, pretty important aspect of how I came here, and why, there's not really many others yet. Because there was always, I guess, this desire to protect the weak and basically, be a counter to the negative forces in this world. That was always within me since I was pretty young age. I was always trying to defend bullies, people who are getting bullied, in school. So it started pretty young, and it just carried with me. And, I was also one of the ones that tend to get bullied. So what I'm trying to say is, if you are from the light, and you really, go through life where you're not from a already privileged position, then you're more likely to encounter these kinds of people than if you did come from a better, family and whatnot. It's not absolute. You can certainly seek out, stories and people who are victims. You don't have to necessarily be one yourself, but I'm saying that was part of my path, was being on the receiving end of, a lot of psychological abuse. And that's what part of awakened me to Christ consciousness. And to, basically, part of it is I couldn't find any healers here that could really help me. There was nobody who was healed enough to help someone like me. So that's why I eventually had to go to Course in Miracles. That was the only place, or one of the only place, where I could find healing. Besides just, going through the awakening process itself. So this is part of why I basically moved on from all the other spiritual teachers. I had to. There was nobody who could really help me. And so Course in Miracles was really the only voice, you could say, that resonated with all the things I've been experiencing here. And most of the text immediately just felt like my own thoughts about, what was going on in this world. So that might help to explain some things, because I think most people, when they look at that text, because it has sort of a negative tone towards things of this world, and some of you might not resonate with that right away. Whereas if you are someone who suffered a lot, then it might resonate better. So, and there's actually, a lot of parallel between, the life I lived and the life that Jesus lived. Because, besides the fact that I think he had probably much better parents than I had, but besides that, he also had to, be a demon caster, basically. And it was because he had the ability to, and was probably one of the few people who could do that. Because you really have to have, basically, lots of light and intelligence to deal with that. Like, not only to get away from that, but also to counter it. So, to diminish the darkness and corruption that could, happen further. So, that was really, and as well, as I awaken more and more, I do seem to have become sort of a target by negative spirits. And this isn't something I can just prove to you, and it could sound pretty woo-woo to most people, but I became sick very frequently within the last year or so. And not all of it can be explained just by, how regular people get sick. And I'm not saying, again, I can't prove it to you, but there's a awareness that there's some kind of negative spirit that's following me and targeting me. So the reason I talk about that is just to maybe bring some awareness about these things, because maybe you would encounter that as you reach more light within yourself. And also to explain a little bit of the path I took, which is quite different, I think, from a lot of people. Though not super unique, because I think there are definitely, some overlaps between all the spiritual teachers where they talk about their suffering and healing they themselves had to go through. So it's not totally different, but in terms of, I feel like the amount of darkness I experienced may be slightly unique. And if you're someone who's wondering what that's like, I recommend things like maybe you could volunteer on a distress line, for example, pretty easily. And that'll quickly get you exposed to the kind of crap that actually goes on in this world. That is, goes unseen, basically. People don't usually act out in the open, but a lot of you guys don't really know what goes on in this world, behind closed doors. So distress line is kind of one of the hotspots for, because people in crisis going through abuse, usually, and calling that line, and they're often also suicidal, of course. So that's one way to learn about that in a sort of safe manner and get more in touch with the heart aspect of awakening. And the other thing is just being more in touch with people who don't do as well as you, perhaps, and trying to put yourself in their shoes. So that's one aspect that really contributed to the arrival of Christ in me. And I don't know what's to come, but part of the reason I'm making these videos is I think it also helps me to dispel the darkness that comes towards me. Is really a form of self-healing. Because I feel like the more I expose things, the more things get better. But of course, there's a timing for everything.